Thank you so much for the honor of moderating and introducing the discussion today on the future of the Jewish people, which is a challenging and exciting proposition to be sure. It's really a delight to be amongst you. So many friends, so many partners in the community who've made this vision come true that we behold before our eyes. So I'd like to do two things before we enter into our conversation. First, I'd like to offer my own thanks to the community partners, represented by the likes of Dorothy, who have understood the truth of our ancient sages, Im ein kemach ein Torah. If there is no material sustenance, there is no Torah. If there is no physical support, there is no intellectual sustenance. I remember, like Zev, when Hillel was down the block at the bottom of Hillgard in LeConte, and we dreamed of a future in which a large, comfortable, multi-use building would house Jewish life at UCLA. And here it is. It's a great achievement, and we all should take pride in this extraordinary accomplishment. Thank you all for your support of this extraordinary. I'd particularly like to express my own thanks and appreciation to one of the giants of Jewish life who helped make it possible and is no longer with us, and that is the late, great Edgar Bronfman. I'd also like to thank my friend of nearly a quarter century, Chaim Seidler-Feller, who understands the truth of our ancient sages, Im ein Torah ein Kemach. If there is no Torah, if there is no intellectual sustenance, there is no meaning to the physical edifice. Torah fills the building with meaning, and that is Chaim's great gift and his great legacy to us all. Chaim has been at Hillel at UCLA for 38 years, and I was somewhat confounded because I was trying to think of the numerological significance of 38, the number. Lamed Chet represents the Hebrew word for humid. Not much to work with there. But it also signifies, if one inflects it somewhat differently, freshness and vigor. After 38 years, Chaim continues Laharbitz Torah, to propound his Torah with the vigor of a 25-year-old. At some point in the next 20 years or so, Chaim will move on from his position, but it is a source of great relief to know that he will continue to be the great teacher that he is. Indeed, I would say, the most important propounder of Torah and Jewish values in this community. Thank you, Chaim. Now, I mentioned that I had two prefatory comments. The second is an historical observation, since after all, I'm an historian, and above all, a believer in the principle that historical knowledge is the essential precondition for informed debate about the present and future. And so that brings us to today's conversation. We find ourselves at a fascinating historical crossroads that brings to mind Charles Dickens' famous line from The Tale of Two Cities, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times." Never in the Jewish historical experience has a community been as affluent, as integrated, and as accomplished as the American Jewish community. And yet signs of alienation, disaffection, and apathy abound. Now, we all know that problems are not new to the Jews. One of my favorite 20th century Jewish philosophers, Shimon Ravidovich, is famous for calling the Jewish people an ever-dying people. Generation after generation, we imagine ourselves to be the last link in the chain. But I was struck, I was thinking a little bit about the legacy of Hillel, and came across a fascinating document. A little over 75 years ago, a new organization by the name of Hillel, then in its 14th year, sponsored a study whose aim was to take stock of, quote, the serious problems arising out of the professional and occupational adjustment of Jewish youth graduated from college, and in order to extend the usefulness of the Hillel movement to Jewish students in American universities. The report noted that while students were well served by fraternities, facilities for religious and cultural activity are, quote, extremely defective, unquote. And then the report went on to really reflect the bias of its own time by reporting on the effect, Chaim, you will appreciate this, of New York Jewish students attending Midwestern universities. Their presence, the report claims, can, quote, create problems for the local Jewish students who ordinarily fit in more easily to the accustomed situation. Now, why do I bring this example to you? To demonstrate not only that anxiety over the future has been a regular feature of the modern Jewish experience, but to show how times have changed. Then the articulated problem was that there was no institutional structure for Jewish religious and cultural life. No kemach, as it were. Today, there is plenty of kemach, but is there Torah? And if so, what kind of Torah? And can we agree on the boundaries of Torah? This question was given sharp articulation in and in the aftermath of the famous Pew Research Center survey on American Jewry from the fall, from October. The Pew study showed rising rates of intermarriage and declining rates of denominational affiliation and observance. On the other hand, well over 90% of those surveyed described themselves as proud to be Jewish. The best of times or the worst of times? We will get to this question. But in the meantime, a new issue has emerged on the horizon that touches directly on the Hillel organization. In December, Jewish students at Swarthmore College declared what they called an open Hillel. What did they mean? Well, as they framed it, it meant that, quote, all are welcome to walk through our doors and speak with our name and under our roof, be they Zionist, anti-Zionist, post-Zionist, or non-Zionist, unquote. It is said that 1,000 students have signed on to this platform of an open Hillel. In response, the Hillel organization declared that anti-Zionist speakers would not be or should not be invited to speak officially under the Hillel name and roof. And this has occasioned an impassioned debate about the boundaries of permissible speech and thought within the Jewish community, made all the more pointed by recent calls by some academic organizations to boycott Israel in one fashion or another. Well, we have just the right people to address these various issues and the question of the Jewish future that is wrapped up with them. I'll introduce them very briefly, since you have in your brochure a fuller biography. They are, in alphabetical order, Eric Fingerhut, whom we are delighted to welcome to this building, the president and CEO of Hillel. Eric served in the Ohio State Senate and the United States House of Representatives. Before assuming his post at Hillel, he also served as the chancellor of the university system of the state of Ohio, so he is very familiar with higher education, and it is really a pleasure to have you here with us, Eric. Thank you. Next, Deborah Lipstadt, known to many of us here in Los Angeles. Deborah is the DeRote professor at Emory University and really one of the leading historians of modern Jewry and the Holocaust, as well as a very prominent public intellectual. She's perhaps best known for her role in challenging Holocaust denier David Irving, an episode she wrote about in her History on Trial, My Day in Court with a Holocaust Denier. Deborah. And last but certainly not least, Mark Yudof. Mark stepped down in September as president of the University of California, a position in which he served for 5 years. He served previously as Dean of the Law School at the University of Texas, Provost and Chancellor of the University of Texas System. He also served as President of the University of Minnesota University System. He is by training an expert in constitutional law and free speech. So it is very good to have you with us, Mark. Thank you very much. And in fact, this may be a good place to start. Eric, we're going to give you a bit of a reprieve, because I know you've not had enough time to deal with this Swarthmore College question. Let's begin with our constitutional lawyer, Mark. You've had your share of tricky free speech questions as UC president. Should Hillel be open to all students and speakers alike? Is the Swarthmore case a free speech question? What's really at stake?
Okay. As always, law professors say it's complicated. It's not a free speech issue in the classic sense. It's just simply not. Hillel is not the government. The government is not censoring anybody's speech. And there's not even a parallel to UCLA. Hillel can make choices that UCLA cannot make. Hillel does not have to invite the Reverend Farrakhan, but it would be difficult for the university to deny students access to the Reverend Farrakhan if he were invited under applicable First Amendment standards. There's also a very strong associational right. I mean, think about it. Suppose you have the students, Hispanic students for the DREAM Act. They want a new reform in immigration law and who can stay and who can go to school without and pay resident tuition and all. The DREAM Act students do not have to accept, partner, or whatever with the people who are opposed to immigration reform. An organization can have its own goals. It can have its own outlook, its own perspective. It is not an automatic that an organization, a private organization, has to bring in dissonant voices. It can. I want to make that clear. This is a choice for the people in this room, and for Hillel, it can, but it doesn't have to. Organizations have purposes, and if you're pro-affirmative action or you're pro-choice or whatever, you do not have to invite, the opposite perspective in your private organization if you don't want to do it. Having said that, I think the complexities are this, and this is what I would say to Eric. I think the students of Swarthmore, and I think probably Eric would agree, but he can obviously speak to it, no one is telling those students they can't be anti-Zionist. Of course, you never should turn a student down at Hillel for ideological reasons. All students are welcome at Hillel. All students can say whatever they please on these and all other issues. They have freedom of expression. To me, that's not an issue, and that's not what Hillel intends. Then the next question is, what about partnerships? Should you partner with an anti-Zionist organization? And then suppose I can use hyperbole. The Ku Klux Klan had their building is burned down. They made a mistake with one of their crosses. And they asked for space in the local Hillel. Do you have to give it to them? I don't think so. And that's another set of issues. I think, frankly, the rules, the guidelines should be clarified. To me, they're hazy. To distinguish between what individuals can do and so forth, then the partnership issue, and then what I would call the sort of resource issue. And I think Hillel will have to draw that line. But, again, I don't think every organization has to bring under its roof people who stand for the opposite principles. I also think we just have to get the individuals out of it. The students will hate this. If they view this as an ideological test of who belongs in a Hillel, Hillel will lose support, in my judgment, among students. I mean, I think we need to be more broad-based than that.
Thank you. Okay, Eric, we're going to get to you in just 1 second, but we'll add the perspective of an historian and someone, in fact, who encountered the challenges of free speech when she encountered Holocaust denier David Irving. So I'm curious to know, Deborah, how you see this issue.
A number of years ago, actually before David Irving decided to sue me for libel, I stress that because so many people think I sued him and I went after him. I don't believe in suing people for libel based on their historical beliefs. But in any case, a number of years before that, in the mid-'90s, some of you may remember this, there were a whole series of ads put into college newspapers by Holocaust deniers. And the editors of the various newspapers said they took them because it was a free speech issue. And of course, I pointed out that free speech is, the government shall make no law, Congress shall make no law, I think I got it right?
Right.
Congress shall make no law, interpreted as government shall make no law, limiting free speech, but I can't send a letter to the editor of the New York Times and demand that they publish it because of free speech. And every newspaper, including the New York Times, has limits. They won't accept X-rated movie ads or things like that. So then the students came back and said, well, we have to keep an open mind about Holocaust denial. And I commented that some people's minds are so open their brains fell out. That wasn't my original, someone else had said that, but I don't know who it was, so I can't give credit. But because there's certain things that are true and there's certain things that are not true. So I think to confuse this with the Holocaust denial issue is a different issue. In Holocaust denial, we're talking about people who pervert the truth, pervert the facts, lie and distort, and that was what my law case was all about. And the people who have different opinions, however distasteful they may be. My concern, I want to pick up on one of the last observations that Mark made, and that is that I think we also have to think strategically, and strategically vis-a-vis the students. What will make them feel welcome? What will make them feel that this is an open place where they can come and discuss certain issues, including issues that may be, or positions that may be an anathema to most of the people in this room. So I think that that's, on Holocaust denial, I would take a very firm stance. So I am against, by the way, and they wouldn't work here in the United States because of that pesky thing known as the First Amendment, but against laws outlawing Holocaust denial. I think they turn deniers into martyrs. So when David Irving ended up fighting these laws, even though he tried to deny my freedom of speech. But I think you have to really be careful of the nuances. What's right and what's wrong, what's strategic, and what's your ultimate goal? To bring the students in the door? Maybe there's no better place for them to be debating this than within the confines of Hillel.
Okay. Thank you very much. So, Eric, we've heard a variety of perspectives. We have witnessed national media attention on this question. One of our panelists suggests that the current guidelines are hazy. The other suggests that we think strategically to be as inclusive as possible so as to, in a certain sense, forestall alienation and disaffection. And you've now had a good 5 minutes to think about this anew, so we'll turn the microphone over to you.
Well, first of all, it's a great pleasure to be here and an honor to be with Chaim and all of you who support this amazing Hillel. Thank you so much. And I actually agree with both of what Mark and Deborah said, both that it is absolutely the right and responsibility of an organization to decide with whom it's going to associate and affiliate. There's not a single organization, including all those who've been critical of us, that don't have some guidelines and some process for deciding with whom they'll associate. But I also agree completely that the nuance here, the difficulty here, is to have a policy that helps define with whom we'll associate, that is not interpreted in such a way that it alienates students. So let me be as clear as I can possibly be that Hillel loves all Jewish students. We welcome all Jewish students. We want them all to come in and discuss anything that is on their mind. We want to challenge them, and we want them to challenge us about all of the issues that relate not just to Israel, but to Jewish identity in the 21st century, many of the issues that we're going to talk about. But you know, Zev Yaroslavsky talked earlier about this being the Jewish family room, the family room. And so as you maintain the Jewish family room, you have to think about how do we have a place where everyone is comfortable. And that leads you to make these distinctions about who you wish to invite in to lead these discussions. We trust Chaim and our professionals to lead these discussions and to decide who will lead these discussions. And we simply can't say to them that you must let anybody come in and lead the discussion or anybody come in and speak to that point. But we recognize and understand that the challenge here and the responsibility here is to communicate the welcomeness and the inclusiveness. I'll conclude this way. Downstairs, Chaim led us in singing one of the most popular Jewish songs, Lo Yisa Goy Goy Charev. So the other one that I'm sure you all know is Hine Matov U'Manayim Shevet Achim Gam Yachad. How beautiful and wonderful it is for us to sit together as one, as one. Jewish community is about building community together. The goal is not to be uniform. We are not uniform in our positions on anything, but the goal is to build a unified Jewish community. And to do that, we ask people to come together to discuss issues in a way that helps build that unification, not separate us out further.
Thank you.
So-
Deborah, jump in.
Let me ask you something, Eric, not to put you on the spot, but we used to be friends, Eric and I. What went wrong at Swarthmore?
So I don't want to dominate. I don't want to take too much time on this issue because, in many respects, Swarthmore is an aberration. Swarthmore doesn't have a professional Hillel staff like Chaim to work with students. It doesn't have a lay board that sets policies. It's essentially a student club that uses the Hillel name. And has a faculty advisor. So one thing that went wrong, Deborah, with all due respect, is we didn't have the kind of professional oversight there that's needed. However, once the students, and by the way, the best thing I can tell you about the students, it's the seven students at Swarthmore, is that they should all go into PR because they've done an amazing job. 7 students out of a student board of 14 passed what they called a unanimous resolution and started sending it out to the press. Within 24 hours, I was getting calls from literally all over the world. And so, frankly, the reputation of all Hillel was now being impacted by the students. By the way, they also did it as they left for winter vacation. So if I did what a good educator would do and say, I want to come meet with you all, I would have had to wait 4 weeks, which also wouldn't have been a viable option. The key, to get very specific, the key that triggered the need for me to say that we would adhere to our guidelines was the comment that the professor mentioned, which was the students' desire to allow anti-Zionist organizations, unspecified anti-Zionist organizations, to speak in our name, and that is, I think, where it becomes a real problem for Hillel International. By the way, speaking of free speech, campuses are the most open environments in America. We know these speakers and organizations will speak on campus. We know that our students will have a chance to go there, and we know that we will be discussing those issues after they go hear those speeches in Hillel with our leadership. But speaking in our name is a very, very different issue. By the way, one other thing that went wrong at Swarthmore, on which I agree with both Deborah and Mark, is, and B. Mandel, who's a member of our board and the past chair of our board, and others who are here will know, these guidelines were passed in 2010. Frankly, not a lot of work was done to explore how they would be applied on campus. Chaim can tell you there's been a lot of training or professional development or processes put in place for how to apply them on campus. They haven't been updated or modernized. They're getting all this attention now because it's really the first time they've been called into question. We have a lot of work to do to make sure that they work properly and they are as nuanced as each of you have said, and I can commit to you that we will all do that work, because Hillel's reputation, both for openness and for being a place of inspiring an enduring commitment to Jewish life, learning in Israel, which is what our vision is, we need to be able to do both those things. We can do them and we will do them.
Mark?
Just 2 brief points. Eric's totally right about speaking in Hillel's name. Professors here at UCLA have academic freedom, but they cannot speak for UCLA in their official capacities. They cannot do it unless they're the chancellor or authorized by the Board of Regents. And So, I doubt, David, we put you in jail, but if you said, I'm speaking for UCLA and this is the official view of this period of history, we'd say, no, that's Professor Meyer's view. He's entitled to that. He's a distinguished scholar. But you can't speak for UCLA as an institution. The other thing, Eric, I would encourage you to look at is there are two questions when you make a decision. One is, what is the right decision? And the other question is, who should make the decision? And I think Hillel has to figure that out. You could say, and you may have both rules, but you have to say, when do you trust the local Hillels and the Hillel directors, and you say, this is your call? And when do you have a national guideline? That's a very tough issue. And that's something that I think needs attention here. If the issue is, I don't know, sponsorship and all, do we say we have a uniform national rule? Or do we say, well, there's give and take, there are campus dynamics, there are differences between UCLA and other campuses. Do we trust the Hillel directors or, I don't know, their boards or somebody at the local Hillel? And that has to be disentangled, because you want to make the right decision, but you also want the decision made at the right level. And just like in our federalist system, some things are for the federal government, some for the state government, some for the city governments, God knows even for the Board of Supervisors in LA. And I think you have to figure that out too.
And just to try to put a wrap on that, I agree completely with that, Mark. And you were chancellor of our incredible university system here, president of the university system here, University of California. I served in not quite as prestigious a position, but as chancellor of the Board of Regents, University System of Ohio. Any large decentralized organization has exactly that challenge, which is what are the things that we have to share in common as common values, and then how are they given life and meaning and flexibility to apply to the local circumstance. I think the intention here is to do that. As I've admitted, we probably didn't flesh that out in time before this particular incident arose. We will absolutely do that, and we'll do it in concert with all the local leaders like Chaim and his colleagues, who will help us strike that appropriate balance.
I also think, I know you want to get past this, it's the last comment, and maybe this is to repair my relationship with Eric.
It's not broken.
Well, thank God, then I can be, no, I think, I want to say something now to the people in this room, most of whom are not students, and most of whom are well beyond your student years, that what may happen within the confines of this Hillel or another Hillel may not sit well with you. You may hear about a program and say, how could they be having that program? But the place, the institution, the organization, Hillel, is not for you. It's to bring in students, and students are a special breed. If you tell them, no, you can't do it. Look, I'm from the baby boomer 60s generation, and I know I have a number of co-conspirators here, Zev amongst them and many others. If you tell them no, by God, they're going to go do it. Dafka, we say in Hebrew, dafka lahachis, just to make you mad. So I think that's something else, that you can't predicate your support of these important institutions, and this important institution, other Hillels in general, based on they had a program I like, they have a program I don't like. We're in a whole different place than the students are, and if we want to keep them on the ranch, where I come from, they might say on the plantation, but that doesn't ring so well. We've got to be prepared for that.
Right, and I would say, just to amplify that point, especially at this juncture in our history when the Israel conversation has become much more open-ended and porous than it was in the past. And this, of course, reminds us that there have been instances in which the local chapters of J Street U have not been invited into Jewish student unions, not a Hillel question per se, but it does suggest something beyond the Swarthmore case.
Professor, I've got because a lot of people have made this comment. I've been questioned by the press on this. The fact of the matter is, J Street U, which is very much within the debate about what should the right policies of the government of Israel be, has been welcomed on almost every college campus and almost every Hillel officially. There's one example, Mark, you know better than I how the Jewish Student Union at Berkeley works. The Hillel director there advocated that they welcome, but there's been a lot of effort out there to try to make this into a Hillel versus J Street U conversation. It is factually not true. And I just need to make sure that
right. No, I just wanted to suggest that we're in a moment of a different kind of conversation that we've seen in the past. This is not to suggest that Hillel has been opposed to J Street U, but my point is, beyond the Swarthmore case, the conversation is a tumultuous one, and it's a tumultuous one from east to west. All right, let's move on to, as it were, I can't say happier subjects, but a different subject.
Intermarriage.
Boycotts.
Better.
That's easy. After Israel, that's easy.
Before we get there, I'm curious to know, since it is a phenomenon of a certain nettlesome nature in our time, the tendency of some scholarly organizations to attempt to introduce a boycott, a call for boycott against Israel or Israeli academic institutions. The most well-known case was the recent decision by the American Studies Association. Other organizations prior to the ASA have called for a boycott. Others are considering it. The ASA boycott seems to represent a new phase in the development of what's known as the BDS movement, boycott, divestment, sanctions. And I'm curious to know what our panel thinks of this latest development. What do you think is behind this movement? Anti-Semitism, legitimate criticism of Israel. How should universities respond? And what does it mean for Israel in America and on American campuses?
What's behind it? I think all of the above. In certain cases, it's people who think that this is the best way to change Israeli policies, which do place limits on certain academic institutions, especially if they're not within the green line, as we call it. I think in other cases, there are people who are using this, maybe without realizing it, but in or using anti-Semitic innuendos and caricatures of the fight, including saying, we're being threatened, the supporters of the boycott, we're being threatened, our free speech is being denied because of this. So I think it's hard to, I wouldn't simply say, and it's too easy, and we do this too much, simply say, anti-Semitic, you know? Some of them are, but not all of them. I think the way to fight it, one of the ways we have fought it, and one of the ways we have tried to show the hypocrisy, because it really is a hypocritical stance, is by saying, well, Israel but not North Korea, Israel but not China, Israel but not Syria. You know what? I don't want Israel to be compared to we're a whole lot better than North Korea, Syria, and China. I don't think it's a really efficacious way of making the fight. I think the way of making the fight is, and other people have said, you're silencing the exact group in Israel, the exact cohort in Israel, which is most critical of a government policy. So you should let them speak, you know, particularly those who are critical. I think the way of making the argument, and that's why the Swarthmore thing, and it's so interesting when you think it's only 7 kids, you know, their parents are either chalashing or bursting their buttons with pride or both. The grandparents are chalashing, the parents are bursting. But the point to make is academic freedom. Academic freedom. You are saying, you as a scholarly organization are going against one of the very basic tenets of the university, the right of the professor and of the student to express their views on academic issues. You're silencing. And that's what's wrong with this issue. On top of which, isn't it strange that you're singling out Israel? Isn't it strange that you're ignoring other countries? Isn't it strange you never mention anything about China? Is it because you're also anxious to go to China? That's why. You know, and you don't want to be not invited to China. But I think I do think it is a serious issue. Unlike some of the other things which are flash in the pan and, you know, the summer comes in and they're forgotten. I think that there is an organized effort behind, or there is, I shouldn't even say I think, There is an organized effort behind BDS, and this is, little creep crawl, scratch kind of delegitimization of Israel.
So you see it as a matter of stifling academic freedom.
Yes,
Therein lies the
absolutely.
ch-
I think
Mark-
I see it as that, and I think that's the best strategy to fight.
Mark.
Now, I sort of agree, but not totally. I start out with the fact I think it's disgraceful. And I'm not saying that Israel should be like North Korea, or should be like Libya, or should be like downtown Damascus. But when you're looking to see, is it anti-Semitic, and it looks like a pretext. It looks like a pretext. Who has academic freedom in downtown Cairo?
That's right. No, I
mean,
agree.
and you pick out that one regime and you say, well, why? I'm Jewish. I have this history. We have a long, as you say, a dying people for thousands of years. And we have enemies. We're not just paranoid. So the double standard bothers me a lot. I wouldn't quite call it academic freedom. Academics like it. It has almost no appeal to the masses. It has almost no standing in the United States Supreme Court, actually, if you want to know the truth. But I think it is academic institutions are open, they engage in conversation, they engage in dialogue. And I think we ought to do it with Iran. And I don't know how I feel about Nazi Germany. I mean, that's really the test case. But by and large, keeping the ideas and people flowing back and forth at a non-threatening level with the old USSR or China or regimes that we don't always agree with and criticize is a good idea. And this is exactly in the face of that. And that bothers me a lot about it. I should say that there's an old wag once said that Rome was not sacked in a day. And I feel that way about the boycott movement. I mean, they just never give up. And, year one, year two, the student body, whatever, Senate votes it down, then it comes up the next year, and then one year it passes, and then it gets all the publicity. It may even be revoked the following year. And I think I'm very worried about it, and I don't have a solution. I think at one level we are losing. The boycott movement is very appealing to, I'll loosely call progressive, not all progressives, but a certain element. It's a part of a civil rights movement. We're losing. At another level, we're not. In 2010, I issued a statement that said, we're not going to do the boycott at the University of California. The chair of the Board of Regents signed it, the vice chair. There's not one vote on my judgment on the Board of Regents for the boycott. The legislature is outraged. They are totally opposed to the boycott. I know of no reputable politician, and some unreputable, I know that is pro-boycott. So I don't think they're going to win, but it hurts. These are delegitimization, I think is what Deborah said, and that's exactly what it is. We will win in the end. There will be no boycott. Yeah, but these progressive associations and some, whether the Senate at Irvine campus or at some Ivy League campus or whatever votes for it, it will happen, and it will greatly annoy the rest of us and be an effort to delegitimize Israel.
Just a point of clarification. I do think when they single out Israel that a lot of that comes from a deep-seated hostility towards Israel, much of which is anti-Semitic, and it comes also from Jews. I don't like the term, by the way. These are not self-hating Jews. My lawyer, Anthony Julius, always talks about them as they're not self-hating Jews. These Jews love themselves so much. They think they are just living up to the highest standards of Jewish ethics. But I do think that it comes from a hostility toward, it's an anti-Semitic act, but I don't think singling out and saying Israel is not North Korea is the strategic way to do it. And the second point, just in response to Mark's comments on my thing, I think he's right. We are losing. I think in many campuses, the default position is Israel is wrong, and the question is how wrong. And that's what many students who know nothing about the situation, that's the impression they're getting.
So
Let's hear it.
I'll come at it quickly, but from a slightly different perspective, picking up, I think, on Deborah's last point, which is that the default position on campus is Israel's wrong, but how wrong? So, Hillel's 9 years old. It was mentioned in Professor's opening.
David is 5.
David's opening comments. The original role of Hillel was to be a home on campus when you had an influx of Jewish students coming to college for the first time between World War I and World War II, and the whole idea of sort of a climate, of a positive, accepting, welcoming climate on campus. We've largely not talked about the climate on campus for a long time because, with the incredible love affair between the American Jewish community and universities, we're there in overwhelming numbers. All colleges welcome us, and it largely hasn't been a question. I think what worries me about, and the reason I get my antenna, every hair on my body's up over the ASA and the MLA and these other things, is that when these condemnations of Israel come from corners of the scholarly community that frankly have nothing to do and claim no expertise whatsoever in the subject, it strikes me as an abuse of power by faculty who are imposing their political agendas. And it's very hard for me to believe that imposition of political agenda stops at the ASA convention and the MLA convention. It doesn't extend itself into campus life. And it's therefore worrisome to me as to what the impact is on our students and causes people like Chaim and others, the student leaders here, to have yet another set of challenges that they have to think about, which is, what are our students hearing and being taught and being exposed to on a regular basis in any class: sociology, psychology, English, Native American studies, having nothing to do with the question of Israel or the Middle East politics.
Thank you. So let us turn now to a discussion of where we are at in general as a Jewish community and where Jewish life on campuses is headed. And we might double back to the Pew study, which offered both alarming and positive signs for the Jewish future. In light of that study, I'm curious to know how you see the condition of American Jewry today and American Jewish life on college campuses. So Deborah, we'll start with you. Feel free to sort of spin out a vision of the future.
Okay, well, I'm a historian. I deal with what happened, and I try to do that correctly, as you are, David. So I'm not prophecy. I think at the end of the Talmud they said prophecy is now limited to children and fools, and I'm certainly not a child, and I'm not hopefully not a fool. So. But nonetheless, I mean, you cited one statistic from the study that 90% of the respondents are proud to be Jewish.
94, yeah.
Yeah, that's Mashiach Zeit. Think back. I mean, we've got a lot of different ages represented in this room. But if you go back to the 50s, the 60s, even the 40s, I would argue that you wouldn't have gotten such a response from American Jews. And that's something not to be taken lightly. I think what the Pew study is saying to us, or partially saying to us, we don't have all the details, we don't have all the back data, which of course the devil will be in the details and the understanding will be more in the details, is that there are now more and more ways, varied ways, multifaceted ways of being and doing Jewish. And that's what makes it so applicable to the campus, that people are finding different avenues, different entree points into Jewish life. It's not just through the synagogue or through one of the movements. It might be at a certain point in their life, but then it'll be in another way. It may be through Israel. It can be in any one of a myriad of different ways. I think the Pew study is reminding us of that. To move away a little bit from the Pew study into the longer issue, and you asked the best of times, the worst of times, that's the perfect frame. Including talking about the campus. We've talked about some very difficult situations on the campus, certainly in terms of Israel. But on the other hand, think about it. There is no decent American university. And it's, the better the university, the more developed will be the Jewish Studies program. It's not simply because alumni or parents or local supporters of the university come and say, you don't have Jewish studies, we'll fund it. Certainly the universities know that Jews love, as Eric talked about it, the love affair between the American Jewish community and institutions of higher learning. The universities know that, the development offices know that. I took a walk early this morning through the campus, and it was like a who's who in Jewish life in LA as you look at the names on the different buildings. However, having said that, the fact is that no major institution in this country, major academic institution, does not have a Jewish studies program. When I started my career, we would have said they all are beginning to realize they need a Jewish studies professor. Now, if you have a Jewish studies professor, or maybe two Jewish studies professor, your program is seen as really schwach, it's really second rate. I mean, how can you have two people covering literature, history, modern history, ancient? The different positions and the nature of Jewish studies is just amazing, A. B, when I was applying, I went to a Jewish day school. I graduated from a Jewish day school, and we knew if we wanted to be accepted to the better universities, we had to be better than the kids down the block who went to the public school or the Episcopalian private school or the non-denominational private school. Today, those same schools have recruiters at the day schools because they know these kids are really good and really smart and know how to learn and know how to study. It's a different world. It's a different world. I'm sure there are people in this room who, if not themselves, know people who chose different areas of medicine because you couldn't get into certain areas if you were Jewish. Or Albert Einstein Medical School. Why was it established? Yes, Yeshiva felt it should have a medical school, but mainly it was established because Jews couldn't get into top-notch medical schools. Today we think that's from the ancient times. So I think even as we look at the problems, we can't lose sight of how good things are and what accomplishments and what opportunities there are, certainly on the college campus.
Eric, how do you see things?
Sure. Well, put my vote squarely in the glass half full category, the best of times. Look, I'm not a historian, but I'm enough of a Jew to know that for 4,000 years we've been changing as a people, right? From the time of Abraham to the Exodus that we're reading about in our Torah portions now, to the temple, to the destruction of the temple and the rabbinic period and the writing of the Talmud, to just our last century with the movements. I mean, all this business about movements rising and falling is a last 100-year phenomena. Orthodox, conservative, Reform Judaism. We're constantly changing. We're people constantly reinventing ourselves. You wouldn't recognize Judaism often one generation, one century to another. So I am absolutely confident that we are going through yet another one of those changes. I am not good enough, like Deborah, to predict what it's going to look like, but this I know. The people who will create it are on our college campuses today. And they are smart and talented and inquisitive and passionate about what they're thinking and what they're doing. Our responsibility, and this will be my only plug of the day, I promise, is to make sure that they have the best teachers, the best opportunities, the best programming, the best access to the knowledge and information and inspiration, spiritual and intellectual, that they could possibly have, so that what they create will be in the finest traditions and carrying on the finest components of our people. But when I'm retired and living in wherever I'm living when I'm retired, if I was on the East Coast, I'd say in Florida. But I got to say, I don't know. What do you say here? San Diego, Los Angeles? Is that what you say? Okay. I'm going to be watching the students who are sitting in this room creating a flourishing Jewish life. But I don't know that I'll completely recognize all of it that they'll be doing.
Mark, from the perspective of someone who has not devoted his professional life to Jewish organizations, but who is an astute lay observer, how do you see it?
I don't have the depth of knowledge that Deborah has. I think sometimes we idealize our past, which is natural. I was thinking when you said Abraham, I said, didn't Abraham have a mixed marriage? At the time, it really wasn't possible to have anything but a mixed marriage. And then, believe me, I'll bring this back and I'll do it quickly. I was reading Arthur Koestler's 13th Tribe, which I thought basically was a bad book, just to be honest with you, and it was not persuasive. And I was wondering, am I really a Khazar? You know, my family came from Odessa and so forth, and it didn't sit well that I came from the Asian steppes rather than it was Semitic. So I did a little research, and of course the DNA evidence shows that the Ashkenazi Jews, in fact, did come from the Middle East, and they came up through southern Europe, and there was a high intermarriage rates with Roman, today Italian women. Apparently, Jewish men really had a thing for Italian women and a long time ago, and we have the DNA markers on the female side to prove that. So, you know, the intermarriage problem, and I understand why it might be viewed as a problem, has been with us for a very, very long time. And what I would say, and my observation is, I think you're going to have more intermarriage. You may have less traditional synagogue-type Judaism, but actually, ironically, paradoxically, more of a Jewish identity. I have not seen. Now, I mostly hang around Hillel's, Eric. So, but I have not seen a decline in the self-identity of Jewish students. But but now the marriages are different religions, different races. It's just a very different world out there.
So as we sort of celebrate that plurality of approaches that Deborah, you spoke about, the multiple portals into Jewish life, I do wonder about the ascent of what has been described by two friends of ours as the sovereign self, right? The individual who is completely immersed in his own autonomy and capacity to choose as she or he sees fit, and as a result, loses some degree of connection to the collective. How do you see that challenge?
It's a very good
We've almost lost a language of
Right.
collective responsibility.
If everything you do is Jewish, if you declare it to be Jewish, if you declare it to be as legitimate as a 2,000-year-old tradition, or what we think is a 2,000-year-old tradition, where does that lead us? I'm not sure. It's a matter of concern. It's a matter of concern. But I think they said the same thing about Hasidut, you know, and they said the same thing about modern Orthodoxy. And, you know, so I think we've seen that before. I do think you're right when you raise the question, David, that it's never been elevated my way is okay, this is how we're going to do it, you know, so you get the Kabbalah Center, which is as close to Kabbalah, you know, as I am to, I don't know what, to being a brunette, I don't know. It's a dangerous thing, and I think that's one of the reasons why you hope that some of these students we're talking about are taking those courses in Jewish studies so that they're learning not everything goes, but then they have to make the decision on themselves.
Eric?
Yeah, so I think this is a really powerful question, David. I agree with Deborah. You know, I have a personal story that I tell a lot that I'll try to tell incredibly quickly, which is that I grew up in a kosher home. I went away to college, Mark, and I was a work-study student, and my assignment was to work in the president's home, catering serving the dinners receptions you have for the famous, you know, for the big donors. And in the one reception I was serving, in the middle of the bowl, in the middle of the table was this big bowl of shrimp. You know, when it was all over, the president said, "Have whatever you want." I had the shrimp; it was delicious. I go home to my mother that Thanksgiving. I said, "Mom, guess what I had? It was delicious. I had shrimp." She said, "Oh, Gewalt, Eric, you know, don't you know, no milk and meat, no pork, and no shellfish." I said, "Shrimp is shellfish?" Right? So the point is, there's all these things that we assume that we don't talk about, and we forget to teach. One of the things we forget to teach is the role of community in Judaism, right? How much of our halacha, how much of our traditions and our laws and our customs, we pray as a community, we take care of each other as a community, we live as a community. And you know, one of the things I say, a lot of times Hillel, Jewish students on campus will say to me, "Well, you know, Eric, I love Hillel, but I'm not involved in it. I don't need to, right? My friends are Jewish, I have a strong Jewish identity, I can go home all the time." And I say, "But you do need it, because part of your responsibility, part of your obligation is to be part of the Jewish community, help build Jewish community on campus, because we care for each other." So I think this value of Jewish community is something that we need to pay special attention to stressing. Not that I want to go back to the Swarthmore discussion again, but to Zev Yaroslavsky's point about being the family room, a lot of people have said to me, gee, Eric, there's an incredible educational opportunity when you're confronted by a speaker or a program that you don't agree with. You have to process that educationally. I say, yes, that's true. It's also an incredible educational opportunity when you agree to give up something that you would personally like to do in order to create the peace of the community. And to understand what it takes. When I was in the legislature, I was 10 years in the state legislature, 2 years in Congress. I never saw a bill write itself, by which I mean every idea had to come from somebody. Every new idea had to come from somebody. But I also never saw a bill pass exactly as it was written, by which I mean that if you want it to become the majority opinion, if you want it to move forward, you have to make compromises that help build community. Judaism is about building community. I do worry to the extent that that's a value that doesn't currently have currency, and I think it's something that both through Hillel and all of our Jewish education, we need to give greater currency to.
I would like to ask one final question of our distinguished panelists, and it brings our conversation back home in many ways. And it really is about, we've touched upon it throughout our discussion, but it really is a question about the role of the university, which has been an extraordinary gateway of opportunity for Jews in this country for generations. And my question to you is the university still that gateway of opportunity? Has the university continued to play that role as an incubator of great Jewish creativity? And more importantly, what is the responsibility of the community to the university and to the project of a vibrant Jewish intellectual life? So maybe we'll start with our recent college president. Mark,
Yeah.
how do you see the university and Jewish life?
To be honest with you, I'm not sure it will continue. It has continued for a very long time. And I used to tell Michael Dell, he lasted 1 year at University of Texas, and I would say, Michael, you know how rich you'd be if you'd stayed all 4 years. And but I'm not sure. I was at dinner at Chaim's house the other night, and two professors were there, admittedly one sociologist and one psychiatric type, who said they didn't see as many Jewish graduate students. That stunned me. How could that be? That there were fewer? And we speculated, do they go out and become entrepreneurs? Where are they? And I don't know if that's your experience, David, or not. And that worried me. So I'm really not sure. I don't think these MOOCs are right for the world, and that we're going to send Johnny and Mary to their room for 4 years, and it's all going to be online. I think there'll continue to be a great role for universities. The other thing I would say is what David Ellenson has called creative alienation. A lot of the most innovative things that come out of the Jewish community, for better or worse, are in the intersection of their personal autonomy and their conflict with their Jewish community or Jewish law or whatever. So you think of Einstein or Spinoza or Disraeli or Chagall or Karl Marx and things like that. So I don't know, that it may be that at the highest level that the universities never did produce those. I mean, the universities really did not produce Albert Einstein, and certainly not
himself.
or Chagall and so I don't know. I simply don't know.
Deborah.
I'm a little more optimistic, and usually I'm not optimistic. I like to be pessimistic because A, if things turn out badly, you're right, and B, if they don't, you're pleasantly surprised. So I always like to be pessimistic, but in this one, I'm going to be a little more optimistic. I think things are changing. Mark raises the point of the graduate student and the students not going on for postgraduate education, which is where a lot of the really creative stuff is done. And I think that sometimes also is a reflection of the family who thinks, okay, now's the time to go and earn a living and pay off the college debts and whatever it might be. That is disturbing. On the other hand, when you look at what you do have on the university campus, and here I'm talking not just about the students, but also about the faculty, that you and I, David, have the opportunity to spend creative hours writing about Jewish life, writing whatever it might be. You write about modern Jewish history. I write within modern Jewish history about the Holocaust, teaching about subjects, and I always make a point every couple of years of teaching a course not dealing with the Holocaust, because I want my students to know how Jews lived and not just how they died, what they did, what they do, and not just what was done to them, but that these courses are taught, that students have access to this. And let's face it also, for some reason, when the person has a professor in front of their name as opposed to rabbi, and it's not in their Hebrew school or day school, but it's at the university, and you're sitting next to an Asian student or a Mormon student, Episcopalian, I don't know what, and you're learning this, it comes with a certain gravitas, with a certain strength, it comes with a certain fundamental quality that they don't have any other place that they're going to acquire it. So not only would I say that I think there still is, while what you raised is absolutely an idea of concern, what we have and what you have here at UCLA, what we have at Emory, but there's so many other campuses in between, is an amazing opportunity. And even if your grandchild or your child is majoring in biology or something else, to urge them to take those Jewish studies courses, because they're not going to have another opportunity like that for a long time, and it's really important.
Acharon Chaviv, Eric, last word.
Toda rabah. I'm just genetically wired to be an optimist. I'm the grandson of an Orthodox rabbi from Hungary, 13 kids, 6 born in Hungary, 1 on the boat, 6 here. My mother's a twin; she's the youngest of. I'm the first of my generation to go to college. There I was, a member of Congress, unbelievable. Grandfather or grandson of an Orthodox rabbi, sitting there on the south lawn of the White House watching the Oslo Accords being signed, in the chamber when Yitzhak Rabin and King Hussein, were beaming at each other, talking about peace. I'm just, it's completely inbred in me. I see this, there's actually, believe it or not, a conversation going on in this country among certain intellectual journals and such about whether higher education is worth it or not. You've seen some of these. Is there a higher education bubble? Have you seen this? There's this billionaire, what's his name? Peter, how do you pronounce it? Thiel, T-H-E-I-L, who's actually paying students not to go to college, to go be Bill Gates or go be Michael Dell. Look, basically, this conversation is not happening in the Jewish community. We believe in higher education. We believe in the value of it. We see its transformative effect. We've seen it on a generation of American Jews who came into the Lower East Side of New York. We've seen it on our generation. I don't know that I would judge this by counting the number of graduate students in the sociology department. The fact is, there's not a whole lot of new tenure track jobs, available in a lot of these departments. It's not just the Jews that aren't deciding that that's the most promising career path. So, look, Deborah made the point. Walk down campus, every building. It's not just the Hillel. It's the theater. It's the science building. It's the library. It's the it's the English building. It's just this incredible love affair that I referred to earlier between the Jewish community and higher education. That comes from our DNA about education. We didn't make the point, and all this argument we had about Swat Morid, Israel, and everything else, we didn't make the point that part of the DNA of Judaism is to argue, which we have fulfilled our responsibility today.
When it comes to arguing, we're all Haredi.
Yeah, we're all Haredi, right. So, look, the last thing I'll say is I ended up as chancellor of the universities in Ohio and the public universities, and Mark, the same public university of Minnesota and of Texas and of California. Think about what it is. Not only is this an amazing country, but what an amazing civic accomplishment of this American people, the public universities that we've created. You can't walk down a cornfield in Iowa without coming across a major public university with a complete array of all the disciplines and all the departments. It's just extraordinary, this national commitment, and I would say that Jews have been and will continue to be in the forefront of it. By the way, look at the leadership of the public and private, great public-private universities in this country. Look at Mark Yudof, look at his colleagues, and count the number of Jewish intellectuals who are leading great public and private universities all across the Ivy Leagues, all across the major public universities. It's an absolutely extraordinary record of which we should be nothing but proud.
So on that soaring note of optimism and mindful of the principle of a machloket l'shem shamayim, a dispute or a controversy or discussion for the sake of heaven, I'd like to extend my warm thanks to our panelists for a most stimulating afternoon. Thank you very, very much.